It started, I can't remember how long ago it was. It was quite a few years ago now. The estate on the edge of Stainbeck URC is quite a poor estate, and it was in a really bad condition physically at this point. There were dangerous steps going up over the hill. There were no railings. There was no light. It was a dangerous place, really, for people to live and be. And the council, nobody would take any notice and put any support into it. And this is when Leeds Citizens came along, and Stainbeck became a member of Leeds Citizens because, as a church, I think I'm right in saying that we believe this is what we're about. Is one of the things we are about is working with people to bring justice and fairness around. And we started off with the local school. And we took the local school a walkabout round the estate. This was then Millfield. It isn't Millfield anymore. It's Aldertree Academy. But at Millfield, walked around the estate, and the children, I think it would be the top primary year, all took notes, and they had very posh. They had iPads or tablets and things and so on. And they looked for things that made them mad, and they looked at things that made them sad, and they looked for things that made them glad. Thank you very much. Thank you. And they came and they worked on this, and they came back and debriefed in the church. They held sessions up in school with the Leeds Citizens leaders at that time. And then they came and gave a report to the one of the council meetings about what they had discovered and how bad it all was, and they really did very well. I would say that Leeds Citizens encouraged them to speak and to how to present things. Just a little interesting thing, we need a lot of money for all these steps, cost a lot of money. And in one of the sessions, one of the children, we were talking about how are we going to raise this money, and one of the children said, we could all make cakes and we could have a cake sale. So one of the things they probably did do, but obviously you need more than that. They then came back and they got some of the council leaders who were responsible, held the purse strings, if you like, for the estate, and the children again gave an account of what they had found. And then the parents of these children and other residents came together alongside this, and they held meetings, and they had one-to-ones, and they went round listening, all the things that we've heard been talking about. And Leeds Citizens, I think I would say, trained or encouraged, taught, enabled some of the residents to have the skills that they needed in order to communicate their anger, because, as Becky has said, they were quite angry, how to do it in a way that was acceptable and people listened, because if they shouted and did wild things, nobody really listened. It just made people cross. And I think that's one of the things I really would commend Leeds Citizens for. It is enabling people, and this is what Becky has said really, isn't it? Enabling people to become leaders or able to talk and negotiate. And to cut this short, because you don't need to hear the whole rigmarole, but section by section, the council leaders brought money into the estate, and the steps were built. And it was a long job because they had the subsidence, the land had subsided, and the steps were really dangerous. Took a lot of building, but eventually they were all done, and lights were fitted, and so on. And the estate is far safer than it was. And because it's so difficult to get around this estate, there was also, they also got each area of the estate was given different coloured road signs, so that it was divided into sections and made it easier for people to find. So it was a big success story. all in all, it was a big success story, but there was something very concrete and very possible that could be achieved. But they couldn't have done it on their own. Church would never have been able to do it. And basically, we did it together.
Just to add to that, you know, Angela and I have reflected a lot of times over the years, been working together a long time, how sad it is and how infuriating it is so often that when people are trying to get something done, and they can try, that it takes a phone call from one of us, and particularly a minister, and something happens just like that. And it's wrong that happens. So this is a great story because, you know, as partners working in the area, organisations with the council and councillors and people with power, we'd been sat around in our strategic meetings for 15 years, I think it was, and never able to get those blooming steps sorted out, or all of the things that were being complained about. And so there are people with what it takes who just need the tools or a little bit of something to help them move to that place where actually they have turned out in this instance to be more powerful than us, and it's not about us having to step in for them, which is not a situation that any of us like, but sometimes you feel like you've got to play the game a little bit because otherwise something doesn't move forward for somebody. But for us to be able to stand back and go, this is amazing because you've achieved something that we weren't able to achieve with our so-called power, shows that actually just with a little bit you have got what is needed there, and your voices are much more important because you're the people living there. So it's always been, it's such a brilliant story because it is one of hope, like you were saying, and I think we should be really encouraged by that, and I'm really glad that narrative is reversed a little bit. And those residents, although that particular campaign is now completed, those residents are still around and looking for different things that they could be doing in their community, and it may have shifted how things work now, but they're still there, they're still coming along, they're still known by people, and they will still want to be doing things even if it looks a little bit different.
Hi everyone. Hiya, I'm Becky. I am a community organiser with Leeds Citizens, and for the first, I've been doing it 6 years now, same age as my son. So when I first started organising in Citizens, I went down to Holbeck. And what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit of a story of organising in Holbeck. There's a couple of people here, I'm looking at Laura, and I will embarrass her a bit later, who can tell you, over a cup of tea probably, about the intricacies of the story. I won't go into a full detail because we'd be here for a very long time, but I just want to pull out a few things from that story, and then share some reflections from a vicar called Rolf Mason, who some of you may know. Rolf was the curate at St Luke's Church at the time. Sadly can't be here tonight because his new wife is moving all of her stuff into his house. But he's got some really great reflections which I thought it would be good to share with you. So about 6 years ago now, there was an explosion of, I can only say, community rage and anger in Holbeck. In Holbeck there's a history of street sex work, but a while back now, must have been about 8 years ago, or maybe a bit longer, the council introduced a policy called the managed approach to street sex work, which meant that sex workers were able to sell sex between 8 o'clock at night and 6 in the morning, and men were able to purchase their services within those hours if it was within a specific geographic area called the managed zone, which was in the industrial area next to Holbeck. And that was the policy, but the residents' argument was that it was an unmanaged zone because there were numerous incidents of people seeing sex work happening in their gardens, in the park, in phone boxes, which is obviously a huge safeguarding issue for local families. Women having experiences of being followed home, young girls being followed home. So as you can understand, the community was very angry and scared, I would say, very scared as well. And there were a number of public meetings where the council convened them, and I have to say they were a bit of were interesting experience, and I would say probably a bit of a disaster in terms of actually getting anything done. So we started to have what we call in organising one-to-one conversations, which is basically I share my story and who I am, you share your story and who you are, and we try and find a connection. And as we build that relationship, then we're able to build power to be able to make something happen. So a lot of these conversations went on in Holbeck, and the result of those eventually was a group of organisations coming together to form what became the Voice of Holbeck, which was, I think it was about 8 organisations, Laura, something like that, which included 3 churches. St Luke's Church was the church which initiated it, where the vicar asked that question, Mary Sadler, what can we do? What can we do in this situation? And they decided what they were going to do was organise. So St Luke's was the church which kind of, I guess, spearheaded that. And they went on to run a listening campaign which became known as Listening Well, where all of those organisations came together and said to the council and the police, we're going to listen to the people. Will you work with us and will you act on what they say? And it was really hard to get to that point, to be honest, because there was serious distrust between the police and the community. There was serious distrust and disrespect, I would say, from the council and the community. But the Voice of Holbeck worked really hard on their relationship building and managed to get to a point where they negotiated with the council to agree to that. So they launched this campaign called Listening Well, and they listened to 500 people across Holbeck. That's a lot of people. It absolutely trounced the council's effort, which they'd commissioned a university to do. And I'd like to say that story has a really happy ending with loads of wins, which came out of it. It doesn't have a brilliant ending. And again, I suggest have a conversation with Laura. But there were some really positive things that came out of that, which I believe if people were to organise in Holbeck again, they would be standing on a strong foundation, which was in those moments where there was real unity between those organisations, and there were moments where there was real unity. The key word that people said, how does this make you feel? And we asked the community, how does that make you feel? And the same word came out, hope, hope, hope. Do you remember, Laura, when we did that evaluation after we launched Listening Well? I remember standing up and asking everybody, how do you feel after the launch of this? And everybody just kept saying, hope, hope, hope. And this was such a change from how people had been feeling before. And whilst maybe we didn't get the big win that we wanted at the end, I think what it was a real demonstration to the community that the church cares. The church cares about the things that are going on in your life. It's not just theoretical for us. We're willing to put our shoulder to the wheel. And I was really proud when I saw Rolf, who isn't here tonight, and Hannah Pearson, who leads Mosaic Church, standing in front of the community and leading them as they launched that campaign, because that was a really brave and scary thing to do. This community was really divided. There was so much anger and so much pain that was there, but to have the courage to stand up in front of your community and to say, we're going to try and make a difference on this, and we want to try and hold our decision makers to account. There was a real, I think, a real moment of power when that happened. But I just want to share a few reflections from Rolf on this, and he's speaking as a vicar, as a church leader. He said, community organising is powerful. When it's about community voice, it's a more compassionate way of doing politics. The church has to say that injustice, this stuff that we've been talking about tonight, is unacceptable in God's kingdom. Sunday services are not more important than speaking out on these things. The community didn't know what to do with their anger in Holbeck, and the community should be allowed to be angry, to express their emotions, their grief. I learned, this is Rolf speaking, that I need to be more patient and loving about supporting the most angry people in my community. This was an opportunity for the church to step into a serious political relationship. How we care for the least is part of our mandate. The church needs to get that. Community organising is essential if the church wants to speak out on injustice. It's about actually doing something that will address injustice. What does it really look like for the church to create the shalom of God? Community organising names sin better than the church does. If the Church of England, so this is getting quite pointed, but if the Church of England is serious about growing church in working class areas, it needs to raise up working class leaders, and it needs an effective mechanism for doing this. We are beyond food banks. How do we mobilise the community? Are we vicar to a parish or chaplain to a congregation? If we believe in common grace as well as particular grace, how are we dispensing that? If we care about the community, do we give them the skills to be a community leader? One of the other leaders in the voice of Holbeck challenged Rolf, who, as you can tell, likes to give a speech. He said, she said to him, well, he was going to these voice of Holbeck meetings, and she said to him, "We don't need the Churchill speech every time. This is more than preaching. This is more than preaching. This is how the church sets its priorities." And I just want to pick on one of the things that Rolf said that about if the church is serious about growing church in working class areas, it needs to raise up working class leaders, and it needs an effective mechanism for doing this. I'm just going to embarrass Laura now, because Laura is a working class leader. Am I right in telling you that? Who I had the privilege of getting to know when I was working on this campaign. And I think Laura will tell you that when she came into this campaign, she felt huge anger and desperation at what she was seeing around her. And it was exploding out. But I watched, as I worked and connected with Laura over the years, as she grew into her leadership as a community leader. God has given Laura certain gifts and passions. He's given her a passion for her community. He's given her, I would say, a strong sense of justice. And she is a leader. She's somebody who other people follow from that community. And I watched as Laura stepped into the role that I think God has for her. And I watched as she gradually kind of built, gradually kind of gave her stuff which we thought she could do, and she didn't say no. And so she started off by ringing a bell in a big meeting, and she was very good at that. She shut up some very verbose police officers, and then she chaired a residents' meeting, and then she went along to other listening events and was really quite skilled at getting some very angry people to actually express themselves in a constructive way. And eventually she was chairing a meeting with the Deputy Leader of Leeds City Council and the District Commander of West Yorkshire Police. That is fighting injustice in a very practical way, a really practical way. And that is someone with skills within the community who God, I believe, was already working in. And we just joined in with what he was doing. And she got to meet some Christians through being involved in the Voice of Holbeck, and she joined a church, Mosaic Holbeck, and I went to her baptism a few years ago, which was amazing. But what I would just love to see is more people like Laura around the city, because they're there. They're absolutely there. It's just that we need to join in with what God is doing. And I believe that community organising is a tool that enables us to do that. Like I said, if you want to hear the full story, ask Laura for a cup of tea at another time. But yeah, thank you for giving me those few minutes.